Now we're going to hear on video from Pierre Sprey, the defense analyst, from his January 17th talk here.
The F-35, despite everything you've heard from its defenders, is substantially more noisy, substantially worse, more harmful to people's health, to children's development, people's sleep, and so on. It's really loud. The second thing is a safety problem that you may not know about. Let me start by saying that 2/3 of all airplane crashes are within 5 miles of the runway, because takeoff and landings are more dangerous than any other part of the flight. When an aluminum airplane crashes in a city, and we've had that happen, it's bad because the fuel burns. The aluminum doesn't burn, the fuel burns, and you burn down a few houses. We just had an incident a few years ago in Norfolk like that. Fortunately, nobody got hurt, but several houses got burned down. When an F-35 crashes, it's not an aluminum airplane. It's in the trade we call it a plastic airplane. It's composite materials, which are fibers, carbon fibers, and a very advanced form of epoxy. And the plane structure burns in addition to the fuel. And when that plastic burns, it's incredibly toxic. It is corrosive to lungs, it lets out all kinds of carcinogens and so on. When you add to that the stealth, remember this is not just a plastic airplane like some of the newest airliners, this is also a stealthy airplane. The stealth makes it an order of magnitude worse. I cannot tell you the number of cases of people poisoned by stealth chemicals, even when they haven't been burned, like production workers have had terrific problems from breathing the fumes of stealth coatings. And when it burns, of course, the results are far worse. The Air Force has a commitment to make every single seat fighter they've ever had since the early 50s, to make it nuclear capable. And the reason they're telling you that, oh, your F-35s won't carry nuclear weapons is because of the horrible mismanagement of the whole F-35 program. 14 years after it started, they're still busy designing this airplane and testing it and changing it. And no F-35, neither the ones in Madison nor the ones the Air Force owns, has any nuclear capability now, because they haven't finished designing and testing it. They're right in the midst of it. It'll be finished fairly soon. I guarantee you, when they're finished with that, within 10 years, the Madison F-35s will have nuclear wiring. Because this is something, again, driven by money, driven by that horrible budget process that Mark Twain kind of presaged. Weapons stored here, that's not the issue at all. The issue is that if you have an F-35 squadron here, it can be activated at any time by the president. And since we now have this tradition that every time there's a little trouble in the world, we deploy bombing airplanes to the trouble spot, at least in order to threaten people, if not to actually bomb them. You know, this is the single most dangerous, destabilizing aspect of nuclear weaponry there is the single-seat fighter with the single pilot in control. There's no other place in nuclear weaponry where you don't have a crew to stop something from happening if somebody goes rogue. Think about that. Why are small, precise nuclear weapons dangerous? Because they have revived an old and totally discredited concept that you can have little controlled regional nuclear wars. You just drop a nuke precisely here, make sure it's not too big, you drop one there, and the enemy is all impressed and he gives up. This is the concept of now called flexible response. That's even worse than the reigning concept of the nuclear holocaust balanced by terror on both sides. Because again, this is inviting some future unstable president to make a little demonstration with a little small nuke. Trump commissioned a new nuclear policy review in 2018. Those are very important documents that are put out every 4 years. In truth, they're documents to justify spending more on nuclear weapons, but they're taken by the world as a statement of American strategy with nuclear weapons. And this one states for the first time ever, it mentions a fighter as part of America's strategic forces. And it mentions the F-35 8 times by name. That's never been done in any previous nuclear posture review. You can imagine how seriously the Russians and the Chinese nuclear strategists take this. I'm sure they read it more carefully than we do. Once that strategic posture review says the F-35 is an integral part of America's strategic nuclear deterrent, that makes Madison a target. So when people attack you for opposing the F-35 here, as they attack me, of course, as unpatriotic, I think it's very easy to answer, no, the real patriotism is to oppose an airplane that is this disastrously ineffective, dangerous, and unsuitable. That's true patriotism. There will be a big increase in PFAS with the F-35 for reason to do with these fires that you can't put out. It turns out when you want to put out, the largest source of PFAS in general around bases is firefighting foam, which of course ruins groundwater and so on. To put out an F-35 fire as opposed to an aluminum airplane fire takes at least 10 times as many gallons of firefighting foam because the fire is so persistent and creeps between the layers of the carbon fiber cloth. So you will have a big increase in PFAS at least being stored here, and presumably when firemen train, they'll be squirting F-35 anti-fire foam with lots of PFAS, and they'll need about 10 times as much as they're using now, and they're already, as you all know, I'm sure, there's already a big PFA problem around here.
So if you're interested in the whole presentation, which his basic speech was about 20 minutes, it's on our website under videos, and there's also an audio interview that from the public affairs show that lasts an hour that has even more in it. So, he's a really good speaker, really interesting, knows a lot of stuff.